the end of the game, the king and the pawn go back in the same box. John Boyes, Dean of Canterbury. The Daily Grind, Chapter 183. James hit the telepad intake platform in a crouched position that didn't make much spatial sense now that he didn't have his knee planted on the chest of a corpse. Instantly he started to tumble forward, inadvertently shoving frequency of sunlight to the side as he lost his balance. The leg that he had linked with Alex to be in contact with her while teleporting was suddenly a huge liability, and before anyone could catch him, he slammed into the floor, clipping his funny bone with the corner of the briefcase he was still holding in a white-knuckled grip. "Ow!" James said breathlessly. "Fuck, ow!" "Oh God!" Alex gasped from the smooth concrete floor. My leg." Her voice rose to a much higher, urgent level as the pain of James twisting her knee caught up to her. He pulled himself forward, setting the briefcase down as softly as he could as he untangled himself from Alex. "Fuck, sorry," James yelped. "Sir, you need a hand?" a voice said from overhead. James looked up, mostly to see dark skin and a crooked nose. He blinked rapidly, trying to get his eyes to focus properly on who was staring at him. "He doesn't like it when we call him Sir." Daniel's voice came in from the side. "Just kick him a little, see if he's belligerent. If he is, it means he's fine and he'll get up on his own." "I am kinda mad that you know me that well," James groaned, extending an arm and letting the familiar face that came into focus give him a hand up. "Oh, Tyrone, right? Wait, am I getting that wrong? It's been a while." "No, that's me." The young security guard from James's old job gave him a lopsided smile. "Been a while, dude. How—" "Not the time." Daniel cut him off briskly. "James, you're not the only person who teleported in. Can you fill us in?" It took a second for James to look around and get a good view of the room. The room that he had, over the course of a few minutes, turned into a pretty chaotic environment. The 6 people, 5 shaped like humans and 1 in the form of a nonplussed golden retriever, who they had gotten out of the house, were clustered in a corner, standing in what looked like a tense formation, almost. The reason was pretty apparent, as multiple members of Response had taken notice. Harvey, who was standing with crossed arms and looking very annoyed, like this was interrupting something important. Elle, who looked a lot more concerned than James remembered seeing her be before. And Ava, who was absolutely not supposed to be here and seemed to be hiding from everyone somehow. There were at least 2 other whole teams who were either coming in or leaving on assignment when James had popped in and caused a little bit of chaos. They were in a sort of low-threat standoff with the new arrivals. "They're fine," James said, jerking a hand limply at the assembled group. "They're evacuees, they're fine," he repeated. "Where's JP and Dave?" "Not here," Daniel said simply as everyone relaxed. Well, the members of the Order relaxed, many of them stepping back, though it was predictably in line with their nascent curiosity that a lot of them hovered by the door to watch. "They arrived first, then you." "Fuck," James said. "JP said he and Dave must have taken off somewhere else." He tried to catch his breath, looking around. Frequency of sunlight had recovered from the abrupt teleport easily, but was still twitching at every loud noise. Alex had pulled her feet under herself and was still on the floor. "Okay, get me division representatives. Harvey, you're here. Get Karen, Reed, Sarah probably? Nate for sure. I've got bad news," James said. "We'll meet in the briefing area. Public format. People need to know on this one." "Sure," Daniel said, nodding. "Elle, you get Reed. Ty, make some calls." When the 2 others gave him impressively bland looks, Daniel just threw his arms up. "I'm delegating! You both told me to delegate more!" "Holy shit, this is what I look like from the outside," James muttered. "Okay, I need to—" He was cut off as a woman's very loud and equally commanding voice ordered a gap to be made in the small crowd at the door. James, still half dazed, a numb buzzing in his hands from the gunfight he'd been in not even 5 minutes ago, felt a fresh spike of social panic as Deb stormed in, looking like she was prepared to violate the shit out of the Hippocratic Oath. "Sonny!" Deb's relieved yell cut off anything James had half-planned to say. "You're alive!" "Yes?" the Camerconda girl stated it as a question, before checking herself and adding, "Yes, more confidently, as Deb lunged forward and wrapped the snake in a hug. I think I broke some arms, Frequency of Sunlight said, leaning into her partner. That wasn't fun. A moment later, Deb was on her feet, glaring at James. He had about a heartbeat's worth of warning, his eyes widening as he tried to say, "Wait, no!" But he didn't quite get past the first letter of his statement before Deb's fist clashed with the flaring pane of golden light that the shield bracers produced. James hadn't switched his away since the fight because, well, no one had tried to shoot him yet, so it was still set to punching, a thing Deb had just tried to do to him, though Deb now seemed like she might be considering the shooting part. In the moment where everything was blinding and no one could see him sigh, James took the second to compose himself. When the light dropped, he had his arms crossed and was glowering at Deb. Stop that, he told her flatly, adrenaline making his voice functional enough. That's not okay. We can have this conversation when there aren't people in trouble. Those 6, he pointed at the group in the corner, might have injuries and certainly need a quiet place to be checked over where nobody's trying to kill anyone. Please assist them. He pulled his hands back and folded his arms again, trying to keep his voice even as he made the statement, not exactly a request. Deb glanced at the new arrivals, and then back to James, with the ugly glare still on her face, before her eyes softened and she glanced back again at the refugee group. James also took a closer look at them, now that he had a chance, seeing that some of them had red burn marks on their skin, or were dripping small droplets of blood from where errant splinters had carved into them. I'm really pissed at you, Deb uttered quietly to James. But we can do that later. Probably should have done it sooner, James said before he could stop himself, but he huffed out a breath and shook his head, instead of following up on that. Look, please check on them. I've got to go do something. Deb had already turned and started calling much more even-toned orders to the response personnel around, getting the potion people a hand moving down the newly expanded medical wing, clearing the room of everyone who was in the way. She had a lot more of a commanding presence than James did when he couldn't make his brain focus on anything for very long. But when he said that, Deb paused and turned back to him, her eyebrows raised. Are you hurt? She asked, her anger set aside because this was definitely more important. No, I'm just... Something? James said, suddenly breathless. I just need to sit down. He looked around at the room, still with almost a dozen people in it. Sit down somewhere quiet, he added. Deb said something else, but James was having a hard time paying attention. He just nodded along, hearing a rushing in his ears as he agreed to whatever she was saying right now. Somehow, he found himself sitting against a sidewall next to Alex. He was pretty sure someone had helped him here. Well, the room emptied out. Alex wasn't doing much better than he was, really. She was rocking slightly, folding and unfolding her hands, and having about as much trouble breathing as James felt like he was. It focused him on the present rather quickly, actually. You all right? He asked, like an idiot. Not really, Alex stammered. Wasn't expecting anything like that. Same, James agreed in a near whisper. He glanced down at Alex's hands, still covered in the blood of the gunman that she'd knifed. We should go get cleaned up, he said. I have to go to a meeting later, I think. You think? The absurdity broke through Alex's adrenaline crash anxiety and drew a cracked giggle out of her. How do you not know? I obviously don't know everything, James said, gesturing at nothing. Also, I didn't tell anyone when, so I think I have time. He rolled his legs underneath himself, pitching forward to rise to a kneeling position. Want to come with me? He offered Alex a hand up. She looked at the offered hand with a blank expression, looking down at her own bloodied hand and back to him before reaching out to take it, helping James push both of them to their feet. But Alex did have one question, which was, how are you so calm about any of this? Well, first off, my own despairing panic tends to get overridden by helping other people with theirs, so that's a useful thing, James said in a fluid rush of words that he would be hard-pressed to replicate later. Also, well, I guess the Order is prepared for this. You fucking liar. Alex's words might have started as a joke, but they came out rough and a little harsh. Not... Okay, yeah, I mean us. We're part of it, James said as they made their way out of the hall, the response crowd getting back to normal operations, and James glad to let them do it. They still got some looks, though. But think about it, he told Alex. We have a plan, a general outline. We've done this before. His voice cracked, and he stopped talking as they headed for the elevator. Fuck, I need to message Nesh and Alana. Let them know I'm alive. He fumbled for his phone, typing a hasty message as they walked for the elevator. Status quo, Alex said, remembering with a distant look in her eyes. Yeah. Yeah, and the sewer, and the attic even, before we knew more about it. Just... James pocketed the phone, looking up at Alex with a deep exhaustion in his eyes. It's not going to stop, he said. There's always going to be another problem, right? But at least now, after having survived this much, we have a plan. Yeah? Alex sighed, partially in relief, partially in joking disbelief. What is it? It is in the operations manual, you know. James couldn't hide a small grin as the elevator doors opened and they stepped in together. Contrary to what some people might think, they actually did have a plan for situations like this. For general crises that the Order was either in a unique position to handle or was the target of to begin with. Hell, when you got down to it, this was why Response was formed in the first place. Harvey's efforts to turn it into a peacekeeping and civil protection group that people actually trusted and was poised to replace the police were going really well. And at the end of the day, the expansion was doing more good for the world than killing a single corrupted thing like the status quo would. So James didn't complain. Not that it was his place to complain anyway. He had given up leadership to people better suited to lead, and that was fine. But in its core DNA, Response was the uniquely suited solution to some problems. Problems like status quo, or the mechanic, and like, apparently, the alchemists had decided to be. The plan wasn't so much a plan as it was a protocol, a simple set of steps to determine exactly how hard they came down on the problem. First, assess. Learn their strengths and weaknesses, but more than that, learn their ideology, learn their desires, their internal factions, learn everything they could about the potential enemy or potential ally. This tied into the caveat that the rogues were actually explicitly forbidden from being invasive or violating privacy against anything where there wasn't an actual known threat. No spying just to spy. They were allowed to ask questions. James wanted to live in a world where asking questions solved problems, and he was willing to put his money where his mouth was there. Speaking of mouths, step 2 was words. Establish a line of communication and talk to the other side. Now, this was the pattern for responding to an active crisis, so a lot of the time this could be dangerous. Someone like James might be willing to walk into a building and ask for a meeting, but they couldn't count on that. So they had a few tricks set aside for actually getting conversations started. And when conversation, and by association, negotiation and diplomacy, failed, which sometimes it would, they preemptively knew what they were going to have to do. Rescue anyone in the line of fire, evacuate civilians or captives first, minimize collateral, and then remove the ability of the crisis to make war or to cause harm. At the end of the day, James was forced by experience to admit that he wouldn't be able to solve every problem by making friends. The reality of the world, laid bare by the cruel and cold fake logic of status quo, was that some people would destroy and take and torture and kill and tell themselves that they were the heroes, or, a far more insidious lie, tell themselves that they were just doing what was necessary. That it had to be done to keep the world safe, that if they didn't execute that child, someone else will, or perhaps that no one else will, and that would be bad. And now the Guild of Alchemists, or whatever they wanted to call themselves, another shining example of the worst impulses of humanity. Custom-crafted slave weapons, hoarded wealth, the group of them sitting back and watching the turmoil of the world flow by, hurting when it suited them, killing when it was convenient, making a lot of money doing both. James hated them. So much. Beyond what he'd known his capacity for rage was. He felt it churning in his gut, a base desire to take these monsters that dressed themselves up as righteous men and annihilate them, tear them to pieces, exercise the worst violence he could bring to bear on them until there was nothing left but dark stains on the carpet and the inferno closing in to take that evidence of their passing away too. And the worst part was that James doubted anyone would tell him not to. If he led a terminal crusade against the alchemists, he was pretty sure half the order would help. He caught himself against the concrete wall as he stepped off the elevator into a different basement level, slamming his forehead into his arm as he leaned forward, torn between trying to catch his breath, crying, or expelling whatever he'd eaten in the last few hours onto the floor. He couldn't really do that last one, though. Someone would get annoyed. Janitorial work was a communal effort around here, and James didn't want to contribute to the problem. "Hey," Alex's voice came to him. "You okay?" she asked, like an idiot. James gave his own manic laugh, thumping his head against the wall again. Nope, he decided. Absolutely not. How could he possibly be okay? People kept trying to kill him, and he kept fighting back, and, worse, he kept winning. "I do not think I am okay, no," he told Alex. "This has been a bad day," he added in a shaky voice. "Oh yeah?" she asked. "Well, I woke up today and hit my shin on the shelf next to my bed, so I understand." James stared at her for a long moment, uncomprehending, until his brain caught up and he realized that Alex probably understood exactly what it meant to put aside your own mental panic to help someone else. An actual smile cracked his face, and he stood back up, taking a deep breath, before he nodded to her solemnly, snapped out of his own panic for a moment. "Yes," he said. "A travesty. We'll organize a unit to make sure the shelf is reduced to cinders." "My shelf!" Alex exclaimed theatrically. "All right, I'm okay," James nodded. "Thanks." "Sure," Alex shrugged, looking away. They continued toward the pool room through the under halls of the lair in companionable quiet, mostly because James had to reply to about 50 rapid-fire messages from his partners, demanding to know how badly he had gotten hurt this time. James just focused on staying calm, dealing with the small task of getting the blood out of his hair and sorting out his thoughts for when he would have to tell everyone in half an hour that he had gotten the order into another small war. He had a finite amount of time to try to decompress, which made relaxing predictably challenging. It was never easy to decompress on a timer. But he still had some energy left in him to try. "Our boyfriend," Anesh started to say, looking down at his phone as he sat across from Alana in the dining area. Alana was busy filling out paperwork, reviewing Skulljack recordings of response operations and catching up on reports about them. Harvey had very quickly gotten them into the good habit of documenting, knowing damn well that the future was uncertain, and a culture of keeping good records was a culture that was more resistant to corruption. Or at least, where it was easier to pick out if a response member started abusing their position of power. Denying that they had power was laughable. Alana was almost bulletproof and could teleport. Pretending that she wasn't would be stupid. But she also loved that didn't translate to the Order giving her a social position. Response was important and respected, and that respect rose out of direct admiration for the things that they did. It wasn't baked in, it didn't come without responsibility, and it was responsibility that she loved having. When they'd first told Alana about the dungeons and their magic, her partners had been nervous that she would chastise them for not using it to do enough. But all those years ago, Alana hadn't even had a good idea of what enough was. She wanted to save the world, she wanted to help people, she wanted to fix problems, but she had never known where to start. And so she hadn't really gotten righteously angry at James or Anesh, because that would have been silly. As it turned out, where do you start was just anywhere. Just start doing good, and lay the groundwork for everyone who came after you. Anesh wanted to build spaceships, James wanted to build cities. Alana didn't care. Or rather, she couldn't see things on that scale. She was where she was, and she wanted to do what she could here, and now she had the responsibility and capacity to do it. And she kinda loved it. Alana even loved filling out the paperwork. Okay, no, that was a lie, but she tolerated the paperwork for the sake of everything else, and she would tell anyone who asked that it was important, because it was. She would also, if pressed, tell them that it was exhausting, and she was pretty sure that they should have dedicated people to double-check Skulljack memories and streamline the process. All of that took a back seat when Anesh started talking, though. Alana glanced up from the response laptop she was working on to where Anesh had been playing increasingly convoluted Sudoku puzzles on his phone. Man, that sentence never gets old. We've got a boyfriend. She grinned at her other boyfriend. Thanks for sharing, Alana told him. Anesh paused. First thing, he started, is it not kind of rude to say sharing? He's a person. Alana welcomed the distraction, tapping her finger on her cheek, long since having gotten used to having fingernails that were a little too sharp. I mean, I don't say it to be an ass or anything, she mused. But, we do share him, don't we? I'm not as good at the whole meaning of words thing as James is. I'm a little more hands-on. Alana waggled her eyebrows at Anesh suggestively, getting a roll of the eyes and an amused huff back from him. But I don't think it's bad to say share. Like, fuck, sharing is basically the basis of the Order's ideology, right? We have magic and power and knowledge, and we should share it. Okay. Well, we don't share all of our knowledge, though I think we have a... You know what? That's not important. Anesh waved his hand. I guess I'm just used to hearing it derisively. He sighed. Alana nodded, nudging her laptop aside to lean forward on the table toward her partner. Oh, I get that. Have you had to try to explain our relationship to someone outside the Order recently? It is a fucking pain. Alana, I don't know how to explain our relationship to myself, Anesh snorted. I mean, I'm not incapable of researching. I've become aware of the concept of polyamory and open relationships and the like. He shrugged. I just still get thrown off a little by it. We don't talk about this very often. I'm only barely starting to think about myself as bisexual, and it's just a mess. I'm a mess. We should talk about this more. Alana's voice and smile softened as she reached over the table and grabbed one of Anesh's hands. It's okay to have meandering conversations while we go on 3-hour-long walks until we figure out a tiny bit more about who we are, she said. That is just something that we do, isn't it? Anesh asked. I know you and James did that a lot before I moved here, but I swear I've done that with you, or something that feels like it. It usually ends up with us at the coffee shop drinking espresso these days, Alana nodded along. Anyway, our boyfriend has, you started to say. Oh. Anesh needlessly turned his phone screen to face Alana. Nearly gotten himself killed, he finished the sentence. Alana froze, her hand tensing on Anesh's for a moment before she forced a calm shrug and leaned back. Okay, she said, realizing quickly that if it was something actually critical, Anesh would not have let himself get sidetracked by her nonsense. Was he doing something heroic or stupid? She asked, the important question. Does that make much of a difference? Anesh asked. Oh, absolutely, Alana nodded. If it was heroic, he's my boyfriend. If it was stupid, he's yours. All right, well, then it was both, if you must know, Anesh said smugly. Alana gave a small tilt of her head in acknowledgement. Yeah, that checks out. Guess he's still ours. Thanks for sharing, by the way. You're quite welcome, Anesh laughed, looking back at his phone. Also, there's a public meeting in the staging area in an hour, according to the thing that Karen just sent me, which has a very, very passive-aggressive tone to it. Would you like to help me find James and see if we can help? Sure, let me just check this laptop first, Alana agreed. Paperwork and good practices could wait. Not forever, but that was sort of the point of an organization based around compassion. They had some leeway for things like this, which was good, because the sentence, "Our boyfriend almost died," showed up in her life with a pretty concerning frequency. Well, at least we know the glasses don't fucking work. Nate sighed from the observation station in the middle of the Orders Hospital. Most of that sentence made his head hurt. If you told him that somebody had built a small hospital in their basement, he would have assumed nothing. He didn't know what he would have assumed. Not that he liked assumptions to begin with, but that was just so far out of his personal world that there wasn't a starting point for it. Maybe he would have had a mental image of a serial killer with like a dilapidated asylum aesthetic. That sounded kind of accurate. What he wouldn't have expected would be that the people he was working for would have sprung for some fairly high-end medical equipment, including vital monitors, exam beds, and a dozen other small things he wasn't familiar with, and then outfitted a single room with all of it, and a number of very careful and intentional touches, and then duplicated that room. Intellectually, Nate knew the hospital space was safe. He had helped design some of the tests they had run on the orange totem for stability, and he'd been there when research had, in an open field far from potential victims, run earthquake tests on an active warped space. But it was something else entirely to stand in a basement that was 200 feet longer than it should have been. Basically impossible to be there, under white LEDs that were both perfectly bright and somehow soft, and think that things were normal in any way. But he didn't have time to worry about how they had turned one room into 28 copies of one room, tunneled those rooms through a fold in space so they didn't accidentally destroy the plumbing infrastructure of the surrounding block, and then, just to show off, left small gaps in the totem's warped space where the construction crew had installed supply closets, a break room, and also bathrooms. Nate was worrying about it a little, but he could multitask. Of the 28 rooms, 7 were occupied, and 6 of those mattered right now. One, in particular, that Nate was standing outside of while one of their newer hires gently plucked charred splinters out of the arm of the man inside. One of them had a dog, and Nate wasn't going to worry about that either. One of them had a wasp thing. Nate wasn't worrying about her, but for different reasons. She seemed nice. The glasses that showed affiliation read the man inside as Guild of Alchemists. Alchemist, which was redundant, but honestly he didn't know what he expected them to call themselves. Not that anything was off the table. Nate knew for a fact that the KKK had a rank of Grand Wizard, and the fact that a group called the fucking Guild of Alchemists showed more restraint in their ranks was actually kind of surprising. I need to ask him some questions, Nate told the medic, nurse, whatever the woman in scrubs was. Is he stable? He suspected he knew the answer, but asking and leaving a trail of information was important around here. Yes, she nodded, her round face giving him an instant and professional answer, which he appreciated. No head injuries, nothing serious, but you need permission from... She pulled a clipboard off the wall and flipped to where Deb had left notes about who was allowed to screw around down here. Whoever Mr. Marsili is. Yeah, I know, Nate said blankly. I have officially given myself permission. Oh. The woman looked back at the clipboard, seemingly unfazed by the response, and checked a box. Go on in, then. Davis is flagged as your observer. I think that means... It means he's making sure I don't do anything unethical. Nate nodded. Don't worry about it. I'm actually just here to ask questions. Thanks, though. He slid the door open and stepped into the room. The man in a now slightly shredded suit only tilted his head in a tiny amount as Nate entered. He had been staring straight ahead, like he was frozen in place, but as soon as Nate was in the room, the man seemed to melt back into human mannerisms. Ah, hello, he said in an exhausted, aged voice. It's fine if you drop the act, Nate said, pulling up a chair and sitting down. Or if it's not an act, just don't feel obligated. My name's Nate Marsili. I'm here to ask a few questions. You're Colorado, right? The somewhat ragged-looking man shifted slightly, and very abruptly, Nate knew that he was not talking to a human. Columbia. Or William Jean without the pretense, but those are the victims' names. I do not have a name, really. I'll stick with Columbia then, Nate said. outwardly unfazed as he settled his pad of paper onto his knee. First thing, I'm sure somebody's told you, but you're not a prisoner here. The false person sitting on the hospital bed tilted its head at him, almost like a bird. James says you need help, so you get help. You can go whenever, you don't need to answer anything I ask, Nate explained. Reading me my rights? The creation inquired. Something like that, Nate acknowledged. But also, I do have questions, and you're probably the one to answer them. The potion looked at him carefully through the portals of human eyes, and Nate got the feeling that he was being more than just observed, but examined, like it was trying to take him apart, piece by piece, and understand every one of those pieces carefully and individually. Then Columbian nodded, once, quickly, and said, I will help how I can. All right. Nate kept his disquiet off of his face, a skill he had mastered in his years working at the Bureau. I need to know about the alchemists. He got straight to the point. The creation blinked, and suddenly was a human, and not just something wearing the body. Lucky for you, I know a bit about them, Columbia said. Are you all right if I talk like this? It's more familiar. That's fine. Nate chose not to acknowledge the shift more than he needed to. The question of what these people were, philosophically, was kind of up in the air, but more importantly, there wasn't any established cultural more for him to worry about here. So he just chose blunt forwardness, which was kind of his favorite cultural tactic anyway. So, how many are there? 18, counting myself, so 17 now, I suppose. Number isn't important? Nothing laden with arcane significance, no. It's just a number. There's no symbolism to it. We added a couple of people 5 years ago, and last year Thames kicked the bucket. It's just a number. Nate glanced at his notes from what JP had relayed to him already. Someone said 16 is the number of nobles. Is that related to the previous number of alchemists? Ah, coincidence. There's 16 of the things because that's how much sap is allocated to their upkeep. Columbia reached his hand out like he was going for a drink, but came up empty. The man frowned and looked back to Nate. Also, it's Nobel, not noble. A chemist, Nate said, adding sap to his notes with a big circle around it. Exactly. That's... God damn it, Nate quietly muttered, rubbing a hand across his face. His expectations were crushed. He wasn't going to get away from absurd naming schemes. Okay, before we get to that, tell me what the alchemists want. Columbia shrugged. Same thing everyone wants. Money, wealth, to buy nice homes, fancy cars, silk bed sheets, to pay to have housekeeping whenever we want it. Once you're rich enough, you can have basically anything, even respect if you know where to shop. He blinked, and suddenly went blank, his other self adding in a monotone. Or that is what they believe, before he flickered back to the proud gentleman. Nate didn't argue. He wasn't James. He wasn't here for ideology class. Okay, so your own creation then. Monetary motivation there too? Oh, yes, Columbia nodded smoothly. Who wouldn't want a way to turn anyone into a personal spy? And if that didn't work, who wouldn't want a way to cure any mental disorder? Cash cow right there. He shrugged easily. I will admit it hasn't gone swell so far. You don't consider yourself a success? Nate prompted. The man across from him flickered away, the replacement there in his place. Nothing changed exactly, but there was a feeling at the exact moment the disguise dropped every time. My creation killed a man, the potion said. Not a good man or a kind man, but someone. Neither of us consented to the process. I do not feel like a success. Nate was, mostly, trying for straightforward professionalism, but even he softened at that comment. You don't decide how you're born, he told the other creature. It wasn't much, but it was what he had to offer. But he still had more to ask, too. I'm not the therapist here, though. There are smarter people than me for that conversation. What I need to know is, what are the nobles? Nobels, damn it. Alchemically enhanced soldiers. Columbia leaned back and kicked his feet up onto the bed. We hire them on contract from some security contractor. Never bothered to learn the name. They get a standard suite of alchemical enhancements, and they do the dirty work. That's about it. List of enhancements? Nate cocked an eyebrow. Short. Do you want the Latin or the easy names? In reply, Nate gave him a look. Easy it is, Columbia nodded. Wraith form, complete hardening, detonation on impact, and networking. You're going to need to explain the details on most of these. Nate frowned as he scratched down the names, hearing a distant echo of the sound of a pen as Planner did the same. He wasn't highly compatible with Planner, but the Infomorph was basically always around somewhere in the building. Columbia took a breath and then paused. Any chance I could get a drink? He asked. Sure, Nate said. Water, beer, juice, bad scotch, good scotch, something else? Bad scotch, no need to waste the good stuff. Columbia paused. Also water, or the nice nurse will be very disappointed in me. In the space of a minute, Nate relayed an order upstairs through his phone and settled back into the chair. Columbia started talking in the meantime. Wraith form is quite what it sounds like. Incorporality to non-living objects, and a little less incorporality for things that are alive. Selective control comes with experience using it, but you can train it. Complete hardening is a galvanization treatment. It builds up over time. It solidifies the skin without impairing movement, reduces the need for air or water, but it also deadens emotional highs. Impact detonation. He looked down at his shredded suit jacket and the seared skin of his arm. Well, it builds up heat and force in the body before causing an explosion. Again, can be trained up to focus where it happens and how it's directed. Lethal, usually, if not paired with the Wraith Draught. Ah, thank you. He brightened up in a very human way as Knife and Fang slid the door open and slithered in to deposit a tray of drinks on the bedside shelf. The Camerona bobbing politely to the alchemist and glancing at Nate to make sure he didn't need anything else before vanishing again, mechanical arms working in concert to pull the door shut behind him. What about the last one? Nate asked as the alchemist pulled a sour face at the taste of his bad scotch. Networking? It's a strange one, Columbia admitted. It lets the person who takes it instantly react to orders from whoever is in charge of them. Nate looked up from his notes sharply. Mind control? In a way. Columbia gave a tiny nod. Very bad scotch, by the way, thank you. But not fully mind control, no. Unless you've already removed the subject's ability to worry, regret, or get angry, which we do. At that point, it allows for one person to direct a battlefield with perfect synchronicity. Not that battlefields are something we tend to get involved with. Nate made some hasty notes. That sounded too much like the advantage the Skulljacks gave them, and going up against it would be a nightmare if they were unprepared. Nothing else? They're already trained killers, Columbia snorted. Why would we need anything else? We aren't... you. It's hard to argue with that. Okay, a couple more quick things. Sap? Nate prompted, checking the time before he needed to be upstairs. The sap of the tree of knowledge, Eden sap colloquially, or just sap once you've been doing this for a decade and the novelty wears off. The older man ran a hand through his mostly gray hair. There's a tree in the basement that grows drops of it as fruit. We take them, process them with mundane ingredients, and get the potions we sell. I don't have numbers, I'm not one of the masters, I just do a certain amount of simple mixing, and then a few experiments of my own. He sighed. Or rather, I did. Nate nodded slightly. A point of weakness. Good. Okay, last thing. Does the guild have any other xenotech capabilities? You mean a cult? The ex-alchemist raised his eyebrow almost mockingly. A few, yes. We have an orrery chamber that depicts relative strength power structures, a mostly useless cloak of invisibility, and a lamp that generates sunlight. Aside from that, no. The sap is our bread and butter. Okay. Nate stood and extended a hand to shake. Thanks. I have to go brief the rest of us on this, but I appreciate your time. Someone from recovery will be by soon to check on you, get you up to speed with whatever you need. He paused. And, you want some advice? You don't need the mask around here. I'm not saying no one will treat you different. I'm saying they'll treat you like a person. That matters. The briefest flicker of facial expression, and the gentleman set his glass down. Thank you, the potion said. Why? 'Cause, Nate answered as he rolled the door open. We're trying something different around here. May I join you? Frequency of Sunlight asked politely from the side of the heated pool that James and Alex currently occupied. Or is this one of those baths? The Camerconda followed up. Oh my god, Alex bust out laughing before dunking herself beneath the surface and vanishing from view in a plume of soap suds. James just raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to come back up and counting in his head. This is where we find out she can breathe water, he idly commented. Anyway, yeah, come on in. Also, are you actually asking, or doing that thing where you pretend you innocently don't know something? Yes, Frequency nodded, tilting herself forward and setting down the oversized bath towel she had brought in her fangs. Sure, cool, James said. Hey, you doing all right? That got horrible fast. I know neither of us are feeling good after the fight. Do you need anything? The Camerconda gave a mechanical hum. I feel strange, she said. I don't know, but I need to be cleaned. Then she turned to let James unplug the speakers from her skulljack that absolutely were not waterproof. So, silenced and unable to be questioned further, the serpent perched on the lip of the pool and slipped in with a move as fluid as the water. I know you're more organic than you look, James said as she surfaced, but it still throws me off to see a Camerconda in a pool. He narrowed his eyes at her. Or to be reminded that you can float. Frequency of Sunlight just nodded at him vigorously, spraying arcs of water droplets across James's face and getting a sputter out of him at the much less graceful maneuver. Before James could protest, Alex surged back to the surface, gasping for air. He mentally marked down, cannot breathe water under the column he had for her in his headspace. Then he looked away rapidly as she stood up in one of the shallower parts of the pool, the part of the stone carved as seats, pointedly not making any mental notes about how she looked. The baths that had been built in the Lair's basement were wondrous, and, in part, the feeling of otherworldliness that you could feel in them, with all the small colored glimmers of lights, fountains of water constantly refreshing the pools, varnished wood and copper piping, it all aided in people easily taking for granted the other weird thing, which was bathing together, usually naked. Nudity wasn't really a problem for a lot of them. A lot of the members of the Order had gotten stabbed or shot for each other at some point. It certainly wasn't an issue for the Camercondas, but there was a gap between being intellectually okay with something and then being dropped into the experience for the first handful of times. There was a vulnerability to it that was kind of scary. There had to be some sort of trust between anyone you were with, or it just all fell apart. But it was too nice, having a hot bath on demand, in a place that looked like it was plucked out of a fantasy world, to actually give it up without trying. So, despite the fact that James was still getting used to it, he did what he did best and filled the awkward gap with conversation. Kinda surprised you're here, actually, Sonny, he said, looking off to the side of the pool and the folding wooden palisade between this one and the next. I figured Deb would have tied you up and made sure you didn't run off. The Camerconda couldn't speak at the moment, but she let out a low hiss, shaking her head as she stuck her mouth above the water just far enough to make the disappointed noise. Which, apparently, was enough for Alex to interpret. Yeah, she was real mad at you, she said to James. What the hell? Deb is... He looked over to where Frequency of Sunlight was thrashing her way through the water toward a shallow disk of rock made for a Camerconda to curl up on. She's protective. Yeah, but like... Alex shrugged. I don't know, I thought I knew her. We're friends, right? We hang out a lot. This is weird behavior for her. Frequency, are you okay if we talk about this? James asked, considerately, before he kept going, getting a slow, almost reluctant nod from Deb's partner. He sighed. I think she's still remembering the status quo attack, James said. Both of them almost died, right? Another nod in reply from Sonny, this time with an angry hiss attached. I'm not going to say she's overreacting or she needs to get over it, because that's fucking stupid, but she's letting it dominate her world. She gets mad whenever Sonny is involved with anything, which is a problem because, you know. Because she's a teenager? Alex asked. The camera conda girl on the other side of the pool dipped her head into the water and then came back up and nailed Alex in the face with a surprisingly accurate stream, briefly turning herself into a water feature. Holding back a laugh, James kicked a small splash up at Frequency of Sunlight. I was going to say because she's one of our knights, but yeah, sorry, Frequency, Alex has a point. You are kind of a teenager. Sort of. It's actually really hard to tell where camera condas are developmentally, or how to treat you sometimes. Are you adults? Are you kids? Are you something else we don't have context for? Probably that one. It sounds the most confusing. Frequency of Sunlight lowered the lens of her camera eye to a squinting point, leaning forward as if to glare at James. I think she thinks you're not a kid, Alex filled in. I feel like I'm watching Star Wars again for the first time and wondering why Han can understand Chewie, but no one else can, James muttered. Okay, yes, you don't feel like a kid, but you know who else says that? Every other teenager in the building. James folded his arms over his chest, leaning back to let the warm water bob his body around. Does that make you capable of making big life choices with actual consent? I think Deb's whole thing is that she's terrified that you're going to die on her without actually realizing what you're signing up for. But that's kind of uncomfortable too, because then she's treating you like her kid and not her partner. Unless part of that is calling her mom. The wildly inappropriate thing James was about to say as his mind wandered from subject to subject without supervision was also cut off by a second jet of water from the camera conda. He filed a mental note as he toppled off his seat and into the deepest part of the pool, accompanied by a splash and Alex's thrilled giggling, that apparently camera condas were part water Pokemon and they all knew Hydro Cannon. You know that's water with like soap and blood in it and stuff, right, Sonny? Alana's voice came from over James's head as he resurfaced. He looked up and saw both his partners' faces looking down at him, Anesh looking worried, Alana looking amused but with a tension behind it. Hey! James tried to sound excited. You missed all the fun. Also, we purified the water after we got the blood off, so it's mostly just soap and not that much soap. Alana waggled a finger at the camera conda anyway. Sonny, don't agree with him. Don't eat soap. Actually, maybe you can eat soap? Probably just don't eat soap. And yeah, hey James, how was Utah? Dry, James commented. Kinda nice, actually. A little sun, sorta quiet, met some new friends. Uh-huh. Anesh successfully rolled to disbelieve James's bullshit. Right. And the blood and stuff? Alana asked with raised eyebrows. Also the message you sent us that said almost died, not dead, decompressing. James let out a breath, expelling the air from his lungs and letting himself start to drop down into the water, maintaining eye contact with Alana while he sunk out of view. Oh, no you don't. Alana dropped to one knee in a smooth motion, dipping one hand underneath James's arm and keeping him afloat. You are in an amount of trouble, you goddamn mobile disaster. Wait, really? How much trouble? James asked. An amount. Alana looked over at Anesh. You do all the number stuff, you tell him. Anesh scratched at the back of his neck like he was thinking. 2, he decided on calmly. Yeah, 2, James, 2 trouble units. Alana didn't keep the sarcastic smile off her face. I did tell you I didn't die, he reminded her, slipping out of her loosened grip and padding back away to the middle of the pool, near to where the overhead spout poured a constant small waterfall. Anyway, what's up? You mean aside from you sending a tiny burst of information about your lack of death and then us finding you down here, hanging out naked with 2 beautiful women instead of actually checking in with us, Alana said. It was interesting, James thought, that somebody could turn the shade of red that Alex did and not be dead from it. He couldn't rule out chameleon powers, though, at this point, honestly. Moving with an alacrity that was born of a critical case of embarrassment, Alex bolted out of the pool, rapidly wrapping herself in a towel, muttering something about having to go and having a nice time, and ducked past them out of the doors of the baths. Frequency of Sunlight also moved as to leave, though without the color change, or apparently any embarrassment at all. Instead, just slithering up to the side of the pool and prompting Anesh to help towel her off, getting her voice box reinstalled once she was dry enough to state, matter-of-factly, I am beautiful, thank you. Dang, Alex has been working out, Alana commented. She could kick you in half with those calves. Also, is Alex into you? Is that what's going on here? Alana asked James, flopping onto her belly by the poolside while he finished scrubbing any lingering soap off his skin. What? No. James shook his head incredulously. Also, please don't tease her like that. It's not nice, and it discourages participation in attempts at making our own unique culture. And I actually like having the baths around. Alana looked like she was going to say something kind of snarky, but then gave a small, acknowledging shrug. Okay, yeah, that's true. But it does feel like she has a crush on you. I don't think so, James said. Really? Anesh asked. Actually asking. You, specifically. How would you know? He looked more curious than anything else, but the implication was that James had a history, and his history did not have a good track record. Yeah, I love you and shit, but you are, hands down, the biggest dumbass when it comes to noticing if people are into you, Alana told him more bluntly. Hey, that's not true. I noticed... James trailed off, and then, in an effort to hide his true nature, slowly slipped down beneath the surface of the pool until only his eyes remained out of the water. Shut up, he bubbled. Alana nodded. Yeah, see, I don't get it. Like, you've always been good with people. Not like JP is good with people for getting people to give him their bank accounts and thank him for it. But like, James, people like you. You give a shit and everyone notices. Even Karen likes you. Alana held up a hand with an outstretched index finger from out of the pool she was swirling it in, water streaming off her skin. Platonically, she amended. Karen complains endlessly that I am constantly putting us over budget. Yeah, and why do you think Karen, a woman with 2 degrees and 20 years of experience, even knows what our budget is, much less has a personal stake in it? James grimaced. Okay, fair, he said. I'm still pretty sure you're wrong about Alex. Still curious, Anesh raised a hand. So am I, Frequency of Sunlight chimed in. How do you tell? She made an organic, gasping sound before adding with her digital voice. What if people are into me and I do not know? Anesh cleared his throat, folding the towel and handing it to the Camerconda. In my experience, that's pretty normal, Sonny, he said, running a hand through his dark hair. James, insights? James sighed. Alana, Alex is gay. She's more likely to be interested in you than me, and you came in here looking like you were flirting with everybody in the room. Oh, Alana said. Well. From a pile of folded clothes James had brought with him that weren't covered in blood and smoke, a series of buzzing noises emanated. And there's my timer. He swam over to the rack where he'd left his own towel. I've got to get dressed and get to a briefing. Will you two be there? Obviously, Anesh said. Do you need anything? You didn't sound like you were doing okay. You want a hug? Yes, once I'm not soggy, James answered. Alana had other conversation plans. Wait, hang on, what? The briefing about the situation, James said flatly. So I don't have to explain it several times. I'm going to explain it once to the entire order. No, James. Frequency of Sunlight slithered by, a small sliver and sapphire brooch in her mouth, dipping her snout into the water and sending a ripple of clarity through the pool as she purified their bathing space. I like this, she said. I didn't understand before, but now this is fun. Is this why memes are fun? Because you know a joke others do not? Pretty much, James nodded, trying to ignore the uniquely unpleasant experience of putting on pants while still slightly damp. And then, as soon as he was even mildly separated from his towel, the kind of fun experience of trying to put pants on while your boyfriend wraps you in a hug. Alright, let's not keep people waiting. I'm feeling coherent, and that should last a good 10 minutes before I have another breakdown. And I really don't want to waste the time of anyone who is either saving lives or studying magic. What about everyone else's time? Frequency of Sunlight asked, as she gently set the purification brooch back on the wall hook for it. Oh, 3 uses until this levels up. Sonny, we're all studying magic all the time, Alana pointed out. Alright, let's go. Later, though. We'll talk. She gave James a threatening gesture. James just waggled his eyebrows at her. Oh yes, later. No, love, that's the other hand motion, Anesh whispered to him as they trailed behind the other two out of the bathing chamber. Oh. Oh! James cleared his throat theatrically. Dang. Well, okay, that's a problem for future James then. Present James has to go tell the Order about a murderous conspiracy and help vote on if we're going to war.